Hajin was confused. Instead of going back to their main team, why were they back again? Seeing the two of them who were just silent, Jo-hong then said that he had just asked them. He asked, how did they get in here? James then immediately calmed his partner. He explained to them, their guild, Masked Demon's master has sent a request to raid this dungeon. He asked, who are they? Hearing that, while rubbing the back of his head, Hajin then said that they didn't know, they were cube cadets and they entered here because they saw the road that led here. Hearing that, James then asked, what are they doing here? Hajin replied, there is a monster in here, so they killed it. While he was distracting them, he then secretly put away the twig they got from defeating the Chaos Knight. James was silent for a moment after hearing that. He then asked, what is the reward? Hajin said, as he could see, they did not get anything. Hearing that, James did not ask further. He then contacted Kim Jin-kyung. He reported, there was a situation going on here. They found 2 cube cadets. Right after he reported that, the voice in the gadget he used to contact Kim Jin-kyung then told them to kill them both. Hajin and Suho were then shocked to hear that. While staring at them, James then asked, you heard right. He told them to blame themselves for being too curious. A crimson aura shaped like tentacles then appeared around his body. He then used the crimson aura to envelop the two of them. Seeing the crimson aura that seemed to separate the two of them, Hajin then anxiously called Suho. Suho was really confused at this time. He then asked him, what happened? He then anxiously repeatedly called his name, but Hajin did not hear it at all, because he was currently being sent to another dimension with only him in it. While looking around the place, Hajin knew this was a barrier to isolate others. There was no way for him to see what was happening outside the barrier. He wondered if Suho would be okay alone, but he couldn't seem to worry about others at the moment. His own situation was dangerous at the moment. Because Jo-hong was also there with him, Jo-hong looked disappointed when he saw him. He was annoyed with James. He always gave him boring people. 2 golden axes on his shirt. That means he is an intermediate hero, with an attitude as if he doesn't know who he really is. Hajin then asked, why would you guys who are intermediate heroes go this far just for cadets like them? While tightly grasping his axe, Jo-hong asked, should he answer that question? No matter what, he would still die here. Jo-hong really underestimated Hajin here. He seemed to consider him as an easy prey. Hajin then became wary. The mana he released was really impressive. There was a huge difference between the stat of the two of them. It was very easy for him to cut off his head. Even so, this was not hopeless at all for him in this situation. Jo-hong then felt confused. When he saw Hajin seem to be about to take out something from the back pocket of his pants, he then immediately took a fighting stance. When he saw that, he was quite wary of what he was planning, but Hajin turned out to only take out a small pebble from his pocket. Jo-hong was then stunned to see that. He then laughed out loud at his action. He mockingly asked, did he think a pebble could solve his current situation? With a confident smile, Hajin replied yes, this pebble was more than enough to deal with someone like him. Jo-hong then got annoyed at his insult. Hajin just smiled at his annoyance. Seeing that, Jo-hong was confused. This kid clearly doesn't have any magic power, but why is he so confident? He then mockingly said to him, you seem to be very scared. But Hajin suddenly threw the pebble strongly towards him. Fortunately he could quickly avoid his sudden attack, but Hajin's attack was not that simple. He had tied the ether to the pebble. Jo-hong could only stare at it. When the pebble had shot past him, Hajin then immediately pulled it back. Using the ether, it made the pebble shoot back and hit him right in the face. The power that Hajin released in that pull was really strong. It made Jo-hong lose his consciousness after being hit by a powerful pebble right on his face, and he fell to the ground unconscious. Hajin was true to his word. He defeated the Jinn with just a small pebble. Although the action looked simple, but it was quite tiring for him. This trick only worked because he was caught off guard. The ether could also be used like this. He found a new function on the ether thanks to this. After that, Hajin then approached the unconscious Jo-hong, and pointed a gun at him. Hajin realized that he had to hurry because the Jinn could recover quickly. The best option was actually to use a shotgun. But his mana is only a little left now, and when he pressed the trigger of his gun and fired it at the Jinn, Hajin was then horrified and surprised. The bullet did not manage to penetrate Jo-hong's head and only stuck to the outer layer of his skin. It only made him lightly injured and woke him up. With the aiming position, Hajin anxiously thought that he really needed a shotgun, but before he could even fire the gun once again, Jo-hong suddenly screamed very loudly. The sound in his scream was so loud that it made Hajin slammed backwards and hit the wall. The impact of the collision was so strong that it made him vomit blood. He could only curse. Even though he had used ether to protect his body, it was still very painful for him. He did not expect his voice to be so strong. Johong was also in a little pain after being hit by his pebble earlier. He was really very annoyed with him at this time. A very evil aura that enveloped him. He actually didn't want to use this on a kid like him. Hajin could only freeze when he saw Johong's body size constantly growing. He felt regretful at this time. He should have ended it before it became like this. Johong's form now is no longer like a human, but like a demon. It is a special ability possessed by Jin, demonification. While Hajin was locked up with Johong, Soho himself was locked up with James. He then repeatedly called Hajin, but it was useless. He was completely isolated with James at this time. He could not hear anything from the outside world. Soho realized that he was isolated, there was no way to escape, and his enemy was approaching with the intention of killing. Soho knew he had no choice but to fight. Soho then asked him, "Why are they doing this?" James just told him to consider himself unlucky. When he saw Soho, he felt his face looked familiar. He then remembered that he was Kim Soho, the number 1 ranked among the Cube cadets. He could be an asset to them if they managed to recruit him, but that was unfortunate. He had already gotten an order to kill him. James' attack was so fast that it grazed Soho's cheek even though he had quickly moved away, but Soho certainly would not survive passively. With one hand to support his body, Soho then attacked him using his legs, but even before his leg attack could land, James then moved so fast that it seemed as if he disappeared. Soho was then surprised to see that. He then immediately looked around him with caution, but James turned out to be far behind him. It made Soho wonder, when did he get there? But he then finally felt it. His leg turned out to be cut from their exchange of attacks earlier. He was really surprised that James could cut his leg in such a short time. Soho could only admit that he was very fast. He doubted whether he could match his speed. He decided to give it a try. He had to focus and read his enemy's movements, but he was then surprised when James was suddenly right in front of him and moved to attack him. Fortunately, Soho was able to react quickly and block his attack. That fact brought a glimmer of hope in his heart. Even so, he could barely respond to his attack. If only he could lure him closer, and as James continued to attack towards him, he almost managed to stab him in the head. Fortunately, Soho was able to react quickly and avoid the attack. James could only chuckle at that, but he was then surprised when a sword slash quickly attacked towards him. Soho took advantage of his slight pause in movement to attack towards him. James then immediately retreated back, but he was then surprised when he saw a cut appear on his thigh. Both men suddenly became silent while staring at each other's eyes in a wary manner. After his clash with James earlier, he realized that he was much weaker than the Chaos Knight, but he couldn't find the right moment to counter his attack. He also thought, if only Hajin was here, but Soho immediately pushed that thought out of his head. He didn't need to think about that now. This was his fight. He prided himself on being able to fight on his own even though his own abilities were this lacking. He regretted what he said. His talent resided in his sword to protect the world. As long as his opponent was a swordsman, then there was always a way for him to win. His only choice was to do his best to defeat the opponent in front of him now. Hajin then inserted his mana into his sword. An overflowing magic power then appeared around his body. James was amazed when he saw it. What an incredible amount of magic power. He thought he was just a kid even though he was ranked first among the Cube cadets, but it seemed that he should not waste time. He would end this battle with the next attack, and while Soho was preparing to face his enemy, he was then surprised when a strange feeling suddenly hit him at this time. He was confused. What is this feeling? He knew that it didn't come from the enemy in front of him. He then realized. This was the first feeling he got when he first found this dungeon. As if something was calling him. Something that called him turned out to be a twig from the reward for cleaning this dungeon. Back to Hajin. He was really in a desperate situation at the moment. He himself had been seriously injured, but he was currently facing a Jin at his full strength. Johong was really annoyed and angry with him. He would make sure he couldn't see the sun anymore. Hajin could only curse. He was really desperate at the moment. He was not an enemy he could defeat. He could only feel annoyed at his weakness. Looking at Johong who moved to attack him, Hajin felt like he was going to die soon. He then closed his eyes as if preparing to meet his death, but he was confused, because he didn't feel an attack landing towards him after a long time, and when he opened his eyes, he was then shocked. After releasing the black aura from Johong's body, she then approached Hajin. Hajin was surprised to see her. The person who saved him turned out to be the boss. He was confused. Why was she here? Seeing the boss who walked towards him, Hajin then tried to stand up, but he couldn't. His wound was too severe at the moment. The timing was really not good. He wasn't sure he could handle her if they attacked now. Hajin seemed to think the boss had bad intentions towards him. In the novel, there was a scenario where the chameleon troupe had a relationship with the masked demon's master, but he was also confused. Why did they constantly appear in front of him, after the boss was right in front of him? She paused for a moment, she then extended her hand towards him. Hajin could only feel confused while putting on a vigilant attitude seeing that, but the boss just wanted to greet him. Nice to meet you. Hajin was then stunned to hear that. He then confusedly asked, pardon, while laughing awkwardly. Hajin said, it seems that they often meet lately. Hearing that, the boss replied, of course, that's because she kept watching him. Hajin could only feel confused hearing that. He then asked, what do you mean? But an undead monster suddenly lunged attacking towards the boss at this time. Hajin was then shocked to see that. He then immediately warned her. But his warning seemed to be in vain, because the boss could easily finish off the undead without even moving a single finger. Hajin was dumbfounded to see that. Shock could be seen clearly in his eyes when he saw it. He was truly amazed at how strong she was. The boss then said there was something she wanted to talk to him. Hajin could only feel confused to hear that. While bringing herself closer to him, the boss then whispered to him. Hajin was surprised to hear that. He then confusedly asked, what did she mean? He then remembered that this part was also in the original novel. This was an important event in Shin Jonghak's story. He wondered, did the events change because of his actions? If so, then what would happen to the original story? Confusion and anxiety really covered Hajin at this time. Hajin then politely called out to the boss, but before he could even say what he wanted to say, the boss said that the time was up. While smiling at him, the boss said that she hoped he thought about it carefully. After that, her body then dissolved into the purple liquid, and left from there. Hajin was still unable to wake up from his shock at the moment. He was completely overwhelmed by the shocking events today, but his attention was soon distracted when someone suddenly called him from behind him. It was Kim Suho. With a worried look on his face, he then asked, are you okay? Are you seriously injured? Hajin said that it was nothing. He asked, did you beat him? Suho said yes. While extending his hand, he then asked again, for now, can he stand up? Hajin accepted his hand and said that he thought he could, even though Suho helped him. Hajin was still grimacing in pain. Seeing that, Suho then asked, are you okay? Hajin said that he would be fine if he rested for a few days. While looking at the jinn he had defeated, Suho asked, what about that person? Looking at James who was lying on the ground unconscious, Hajin wondered if he was the jinn that Kim Suho had faced, because his body was still here. It seemed like he just fainted. Suho then said, we have to report this to the association, right? Hajin was stunned to hear that. He then anxiously said that they had no evidence, and they entered the dungeon without reporting first, so they would also be punished. Suho finally realized that Hajin used all his savings to buy shares of Masked Demon's Master. It was not good if they were exposed as jinn. He also felt that Suho also didn't know this fact. After he thought carefully, Suho felt that it made sense. He then remembered something. He asked, what happened to the person he was dealing with? Hajin was silent for a moment hearing his question. He then said that if he ran away, there was no way he could tell Suho the truth. It was already nighttime. When they got out of the dungeon, they then rested for a while under a nearby tree. Hajin lamented. The impact he received after using the stigma's mana was still large even though it was used once. While taking out the twig he had kept in his pocket, Suho said that he thought this was no ordinary twig. Hajin was quite surprised to see Suho not forgetting it and carrying it. Suho didn't know how to explain it to him. He said that he felt it when fighting. The twig seemed to call him. He apologized. Maybe he didn't understand what he was saying. Hajin said no. He said that he understood what he meant. Suho was then surprised to hear that. Hajin smiled. He said that he had a hunch that this was a great item just by looking at it. Suho was then surprised to hear that. It was really unbelievable to him. The twig looked like an ordinary item that could hardly be considered a dungeon completion reward, but in fact, it was a special twig, which can only be recognized if you know the myths and various stories about it. Hajin then asked him, have you ever heard of Mistiltine? Mistiltine, in Northern European mythology, Mistiltine is known as a legendary weapon that has a connection with the murder of Baldur, the god of light, and is considered a god-slayer stick. Suho then stared at the twig in amazement. After hearing that, Hajin smiled slightly. He continued, but as he knew, divine weapons must be awakened to change into their true form. Hearing that, Suho then realized, then this is not its true form. Hajin confirmed that. Suho understood now, his appearance is too simple to be a dungeon reward. Hajin then mockingly asked him, you actually feel disappointed, right? Even so, Hajin was surprised. Kim Suho, who didn't even have the Mistiltine yet, could fight against the Jin alone and win. Can't imagine how strong he will be when he awakened the Mistiltine. Suho then realized that he had to find out how to awaken it. Hearing that, Hajin then asked him to put the twig on the ground. Suho then put the branch as he said. He was quite confused about what Hajin was going to do, but he was then surprised when he saw the sapling powder in his hand. Suho then asked, what is that? Hajin replied, a relic. He thinks this relic will help awaken Mistiltine. Hearing that, Suho then confusedly asked him, where did you get that? From just a glance I already knew it was a valuable item. Suho felt that he was really great. In the original novel, the sapling powder belonged to Kim Suho, but since he had worked so hard to get it, so why didn't he show it off? Hajin thought for a moment. What should he say to make him a little more grateful? He then said that this was a relic of his parents. Suho was then shocked to hear that. The atmosphere suddenly fell silent for a moment. Suho then felt sad for him. Hajin could only be stunned by the change in his attitude. He couldn't even joke. Hajin then said that he was just joking. What he wanted to say was that this item was indeed that important to him. Hajin felt that calling this item a relic was quite excessive. He explained, this powder increases your potential to reach its peak. This applies to both people and items. In short, if he sprinkles this on Mistiltine, it will undergo changes. Hajin then said he would sprinkle it a little. Suho was surprised to hear that. He then immediately stopped him. He then hesitantly asked, is it okay? The powder is important to him, right? Hajin could only sigh at his attitude. He said that this powder is indeed important, so he must use it at a time like this. When else could they get a mythical item like this? Even though he said so, but Suho still felt hesitant. Seeing that, Hajin told him to shut up and just take it when he offered. Suho was very moved to hear that. He then thanked him. After that, Hajin then poured the powder into Mistiltine, and right at that moment, there was a sudden change in the twig. They were both amazed to see that. The appearance of the twig did not change much. The size increased slightly with leaves growing at the ends. Hajin then said to him, I'm right. Suho amazedly said that he was right. It was just Mistiltine's first awakening. Then, in order for Kim Suho to develop and be able to destroy his enemies, it would turn into a sword shape by itself. After that, Hajin then asked him, we promised, right? If you take the branch, then I will take the leaves. After resting enough, they then walked back home. With a doubtful look, Suho then asked him, is it okay for him to only take the leaves? Hajin said, he has said many times that it is okay. Even though he said so, but Suho still felt doubtful. Hajin was really helpless to see his attitude. He then once again said that it was okay. Why would he want to die by using it in close combat? But his words did not seem to succeed in discouraging Suho's hesitation. Hajin thought, for now, this leaf was enough for him. Mistiltine's leaf, the leaf left by the legendary twig after awakening. If he boils and drinks it, his body will grow stronger, and if he grinds it and makes it into a weapon, a powerful weapon will be created. Reading that, Hajin thought, this is not a mythical weapon side item for no reason. He is already happy with getting this. And while Hajin was thinking what he should use the leaf for, his foot suddenly tripped over a tree root. He then shouted so loudly that it startled the birds. Hajin grimaced in pain. He was confused why there was a tree root here, but he suddenly felt a déjà vu. He had experienced a similar incident before. Seeing Hajin, who was silent behind, Suho then asked, what was he doing? Did something happen? He thought he heard a loud noise earlier. Hajin said that it was nothing. He would be there soon, and Hajin then continued walking home while humming a song. He was really happy because he had received unexpected sustenance like this. At the Suwon dens of Devil, the members of the chameleon troupe were sitting there relaxing. There was also Jane. She was currently watching the recording of Hajin's fight earlier. Seeing the scene when Hajin threw a pebble into Johong's face, Jane then thought, even if you exert all your magic power, it is not easy to unleash such power with such a whip. Most importantly, what she liked most about him was his cold decision-making. Kim Hajin at that time did not know that his opponent was a djinn, but he could kill him without hesitation. Jane then paused the recording and said, "This time the boss is right. This kid has potential." The boss was currently also seen watching the recording of Hajin's battle. Hearing her words, the boss then said that it was enough. Looking at her walking away, Jane then confusedly asked, "Is she leaving already? Is she not going to watch it until the end? She also wants to see the demonification too." The boss said that she didn't want to see it. Jane was then confused to hear that. The boss was silent for a moment. She then muttered, "Because it was disgusting." After a long journey, Hajin finally arrived at his dormitory. He was very tired at this time. His walk was even like a zombie. As he continued to walk, he felt that his body was all sore. It felt like he was going to die, but when Hajin was about to go to his room, he was then surprised when he saw Evangel approaching him. He then asked, "Are you awake?" While carrying her body, he apologized to her. He told her to just continue sleeping. When Hajin arrived at his room and was about to put Evangel on the bed, he then froze for a moment. When he saw the night sky filled with the beauty of the stars with the full moon shining so beautifully, at that time, when they arrived at Suwon Station, Soho suddenly asked him to return to Cube first. Hajin was then confused to hear that. He then asked, "What about him?" Soho said, since he was already here. He also wanted to visit his family. At the moment of farewell, Soho then called him. He said, "For today, thank you very much." He smiled very brightly at him. Hajin could only be stunned to see that Kim Soho is the protagonist in this world. He does not compromise anything. He is selfless. He is just a hero of justice who walks on the path of truth. In the real world, you can't find people like him. But still, he described it with the feeling of wanting people like him to exist somewhere. Soho, which means to protect, the real hero who will protect this world. Seeing Hajin, who was just silent, Soho then confusedly asked, "What's wrong?" While smiling, Hajin replied, "It's nothing." While waving his hand towards him, he then told him to take care of himself. In this world, he was the person he could trust more than anyone else.